about. Okay.
Can I inject a little quick defense?
That they're not. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, before we get too far along, I just thought it was a cheap shot to frame Matt's webpage as him presenting it as the be all and end all on Christian theology. No, he
I
just
didn't say
likes to
that.
make sure you implied that quite
Where?
strongly.
Where?
I
About-
think
about 2
I
minutes
got
Where did
ago
I
in
the
say
your
that?
impression
Imply
conversation.
that?
Would you
What
let
did I
me
even-
finish? Would you let me finish? I have worked with him for over 40 years, and what he does is he will compliment someone like David Neff in the beginning of this discussion tonight, who properly outlined the Christian view of the Trinity. Okay, you don't necessarily have to accept it or believe it, but to properly present the Christian view of the point is what he's interested in. Then he will listen and take seriously the critique of that position. But to misrepresent or to somehow imply that he has some grandiose view of his own website is not accurate. Okay, that's
Okay.
all.
Okay.
Is
Well,
that fair? Is that fair?
I want to be properly understood because I'm having a hard time seeing what was said that's making you assume that.
I got that impression because he kept criticizing, "Oh, you don't know the Christian theology." Well, that's his specific Christian theology that a lot of Christians disagree with.
By the
Okay,
way, I'd
wait.
like to take this time to address a question somebody asked me in the side chat, just so we don't get like 10 minutes past it. Bill Chiberis, I don't know how to pronounce the last name. Leo, have you heard of Dr. John Lennox? Yes, I've watched many of his videos. He was one of my favorites when I was a Christian apologist alongside Dr. Craig.
Yep.
And yes, Erica, you should come in just because it would be fun.
Yep. I want to end Erica. It'll be fun.
I've
By
got
the
a
way-
split, David. I got some demands here that are being put upon me, but appreciate the after show.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and I hope some of that material you can take your time and just
Yeah. And Charlie,
peruse it when you have at your leisure when you have time.
yeah. And Charlie, if you want to have a one-on-one discussion sometime, please let me know. I'd be happy to have you on my channel, do a little bit of a discussion with you.
Well, thank you, David. I always like talking to you. Indeed.
Yeah. And I always like talking to you as well. I like to make sure I understand your position and properly understand the Christian perspective.
Yeah, you do a good job of it. I mean, no doubt about it, and that's appreciated on this end. I tell you, very much appreciated. You know, if you're going to tackle something and you give it a proper representation, then the tackling of it is tolerable.
Yep. All right. Have a good day.
You too. Good night, you guys.
Yep. Smoky Saints. Thank you.
See you, Charlie.
Thank you so much for being so patient.
Who's leaving?
Everything has been quite busy back and forth. So Smoky, feel free to unleash your stuff.
No, I'd almost decided I was slightly more interested in talking to Matt Slick about his predeterminism than I was Snake about his complete and utter logical philosophical failings for the bit of the debate that I actually managed to catch. But I did want to maybe give my 2 cents as typical of the case. David Neff, I appreciate you come into my after shows and give you a little 2 cents and stuff. And I didn't catch a lot of the debate. I was out. I came back, saw the notification, and then clicked on. I think I caught maybe the last 15, 20 minutes of it. But I did want to say, there was something to Matt Slick's point of saying to want to be at least consistent inside, the potentiality of the framework of the Christian environment. Like, if you're going to do an internal critique, like to be consistent, like if you're taking a atheistic presupposition, which is your falsification criteria, and forcing it into the text, which is your interpretation, and then judging it, that's not really fair. And so like when Snake says, for instance, so like if Snake says, well, God put the tree there with the intention of them to not eat it, like, and that's just where the story stops. That's just where the narrative stops. That's an interpretive presupposition that's shoved into the text.
I don't think I ever said that, but
well, you kind of have to take the position of the snake was right. See, because your position is snake was right because the snake wanted people to have the knowledge of good and evil, and you assume that God didn't want them to have that, and
that's what I was seeing.
And that's the
let's
problem.
Let's give him a chance to defend himself. I want to see what he has to say.
Well, just let me finish real quick, and I'll make the point. Because the idea is that he placed it in the garden because they just weren't ready to have it yet. and it was like a faith test. So God ultimately did want them to have it, just at the right timing.
Does the text say that?
matured to- well, it doesn't have to. See, because
So
you
just
presuppose.
you just put your
No,
own
no, no.
interpretation into it that's
No,
not actually
that's
there.
what you do. Well,
I'm not
Snake,
putting
if you're
anything
gonna
into
do
it.
it, well, here's the problem. If you're going to do it on your side from your atheistic presupposition that that's part of the narrative you're accepting, you don't get to say, I can't do it. What we need to do is say that the potentialities of what is possible inside the narrative needs to be considered. You don't just get to dismiss it because it, fails against what you want to straw man into the text.
I
so
didn't
you
say
can
you can't do
falsify
it. I said you did
Well,
do
I'm
it.
just saying that you just don't get to arbitrarily decide for everyone that that's the interpretation that has to be pulled from it. It's just not coherent.
No,
And frankly, it's a little arrogant, and frankly, a little leftist, Snake. I thought you came over to the right. You're supposed to get rid of that whole "I do everyone's thinking for them" type garbage.
This has nothing to do with politics, but
Oh, sure it does.
no, the Bible's not.
That's very
nothing to do with my
lefty.
politics.
That's very lefty. I want to do everyone's thinking for them and arbitrate what they actually pull out of things. Like that's a very lefty.
That's
way to
definitely
think.
not a left wing.
Yeah,
Oh, of course it
idea.
is. Of course it is.
Lost
It's
me.
pure.
Not.
It's pure gatekeeping, thought policing.
Except
Absolutely.
that's not what
Like
the
you
left.
have to take it this way. If you
I'm
don't
not
take
telling
it
you
this
what
way,
you have to
think.
you're
I don't
objectively
think
in error.
I don't know
Snake
any
is
left-
using his
All I
arbitrary
said,
standard
no, all
to
I
state
said,
an objective standard of
all I said was
interpretation.
that
It's
statement you
ridiculous.
said. All I said was that statement you said is not in the actual text. That's it. I didn't say
And,
that
and,
was
and the
correct. I didn't
interpretation
say it
you
was
take is
incorrect.
not in the
I
actual
didn't
text.
say I'm doing my
It's
thinking
cold
for
where I'm
you.
at, dude.
There you go.
It's freaking freezing, man. I'm getting under the blankets.
Yeah, by the way, so I see gatekeeping on both ends of the extreme fringes. So yeah,
Well, gatekeeping isn't the issue. It's the methodology and its implementation. What are you gatekeeping?
What
What
am I
is-
gatekeeping?
And what are you implementing? Well, Snake, in terms of your argumentation, is that you would criticize Matt Slick, and I think seemingly Joshua did as well. I don't know what Joshua's deal is. I've never seen him before. But the
I
idea
don't
that,
even know what I said. All right.
well, but something along
I'm not
the line-
taking a stand.
It's fine, dude. But it was something along the lines of like Matt Slick kind of like sets his own standard of
No,
Christianity.
That's not
or-
quite. No.
I didn't say anything like that.
Or Snake said something like that. He promotes like
No,
this is the
no.
only way to accept Christianity.
Also, I
No.
said before I got in the chat, before I got in the live chat, when I was chatting, before I got into talking, right?
Right.
I said I also watch his channel.
Okay.
I didn't say that I 100% agree with everything he says.
Right.
You
I
know?
don't either.
Yeah,
I'd love to debate him on his Calvinism. In fact, I was more prioritizing.
and I'm just
that
finding
than
out that
debate.
he is the
by the
about
way,
something. I haven't been
Snooki-
watching him for very long.
And by the way, let me switch on the other side to give it to Snake too on another side of it where it's not quite as critical. But like you do know you were debating a Calvinist tonight, right?
I didn't know that.
See,
It
that's
wasn't really
this is the
relevant
problem.
to morality.
Yeah, this is the problem. Like especially for a
I don't-
Calvinist,
I don't
morality.
care about Calvinism.
But what I'm saying, Snake, is that like from a Calvinist perspective, morality is a nightmare topic, because the Calvinist believes in the predetermination of evil. They're almost dualistic in a way. So like where all the leverage points you could have been pushing on Matt would have been like, well, God wanted them to eat of the tree. God wanted man to fall. God willed man to be a fallen creature. God willed and wanted and predetermined all this pain to exist. You see, the Calvinistic predeterministic frame tends to philosophically make God, a bit of a moral monster. And that was a whole, leverage point probably in the debate that you could have taken advantage of.
That's a good
Anyways,
point. But I probably wouldn't. I was trying to refocus on something else though.
Can I jump in and answer a question from the audience before this continues? Like
Go right
20
ahead,
minutes now? So, in whom we have redemption through his blood, asked if I may, regarding gravitational singularities.
Why don't
does
these
general
people come in the
relativity break-
room?
I was just about to say, like, people come. I believe the link is in the highlighted comment. Come on in. In whom Lena Powell, the synagogue. Let's get more non-atheists. And we got 3 atheists and two theists. I want there to be more theists than atheists, quite frankly. Anyway,
Yeah.
He says, if I may, regarding gravitational singularities, does general relativity break completely down in the interior of a black hole due to quantum effects, torsions, or what? First thing, yes, general relativity breaks down at what's called a singularity. That's what a singularity is that the physics that we use to describe, say, curvature in space-time, it does not yield accurate results. In a more technical term, a lot of the limits that define these, I don't know if I really want to say functions, but the limits in the math that are utilized in general relativity tend to infinity, and that makes them either just straightforwardly undefined, or a term that's called non-differentiable, which means you can't differentiate the function at that point, which is what we call a singularity. So a singularity is not some physical object that exists. It's a mathematical wall past which your mathematical equations will no longer yield accurate results or accurate descriptions of that physical system.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
So yeah, and I also wanted to say I'm kind of bummed that Matt left, because I did want to get at him on that whole logic thing, because he said he's somewhat of a logician, and I had some questions I wanted to ask him, because he kept
I had questions for him.
I didn't
too.
even
I'm a
notice he
little
left.
bummed by that, too. Yeah, I kind of wanted him
he kept
to.
asking Snake.
Can
if
you guys
Snake-
hear me?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can hear you.
Okay, I'm messing around right now.
Snake that, how do you I don't know if he used the word prove, but I think he said, like, how do you justify logic or something like that. But the thing is that, like, the fundamental laws of logic, like the law of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle, are axiomatic. So to ask how do you justify them is a meaningless question. Things like truth value, things like a higher order justification arise out of the system that's built on the axioms of logic. So to then take those concepts and apply them back to those axioms makes no sense at all.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to explain to him, if we accept these axioms, then these are the things we can derive from them, and they're the only axioms we can really deal with, or else we're just sitting there twiddling our thumbs, babbling, doing nothing.
Exactly.
But you have moral axioms that you're using to judge, your entire moral perspective in the world around you. You don't
Well,
necessarily
they're not axioms in
have
the same
all,
way, 'cause-
coherent and consistent justifications for why you think, child abuse is wrong.
Yeah, I do.
Unilaterally, because
they're
clearly there's a bunch of
directly-
people that think child abuse is fine, hence they do it. So
Yeah, but they're derived directly from the axioms of law of non-contradiction, excluded middle, identity.
no, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the layer up. I'm talking about the axiomatic justifications you have for morality, because that was your debate tonight, morality.
I don't have axiomatic justifications. The principle of freedom is derived directly from the axioms of logic.
By the way, David, Argatha is backstage.
But you do not get to transpose any concept of actual morality, right or wrong, into that. That's just a statement of affairs.
Morality. If
You're
morality is
just
objective,
stating that
they're
freedom
statements of
happens
fact.
to exist as a component of reality. That doesn't actually answer anything. You're just stating something that is.
Yeah, and if morality is objective, it's a statement of fact.
Correct.
So it's something that is as well, and so it can be derived.
But your justification for it is still a priori, axiomatic. You don't have a justification for that which you have decided is moral. You can't say that, I decided.
Decided it.
Well, you decided freedom.
No, the logic decided
is
it.
a paradigm for morality. You made that decision. It's not
No.
just something.
No.
Yeah,
I do have
don't
to ask-
decide the
you
answer
could
I
base
get
it
on my
around
math.
empathy.
I don't
You could
decide.
base it around empathy like the secular humanists do.
No,
Snake.
'cause
It's
that's
just an
subjective.
arbitrary decision.
That's
Exactly.
subjective.
It's your subjective choice to build it off of freedom.
No, it's
inside
not.
This objective
Can I ask a quick
No.
question for Snake?
Yeah.
I'm genuinely curious, how, because I'm a moral relativist. So how do moral truths?
I am a little bit too.
How do moral truths? What's the word I'm looking for? How do they come out of logic?
So it comes. You use logic. It comes out of the fact of existence. Basically, so I guess you could apply the law of identity in the fact that there is something and nothing produces nothing. So the fact that there is something means that there's some kind of logical contradiction in the state of true nothingness, and so there's something that's incorrect about nothingness because it can't exist because something does exist, and so everything would have to be derived from the fact of existence. We don't exactly know how that works, but then, so the other question I ask is if there is good in something, what is it good for? It has to exist in order to be good for anything, and so
Is good function?
is good function? Well, if something's
Yeah.
good, if something has a function, it's good for that function.
Right, but it sounds like you're talking about good being the ability to perform a function.
Yeah,
Like, is
that's,
function what is good?
I think there might be some equivocation on the usage of the word good here. Maybe I'm wrong.
I'm thinking moral. I thought that was the context of the
Okay.
conversation.
So
yeah,
that's
this-
what I thought. I just wanted to throw that out there just to make sure everybody kind of was on the same page.
I'm basically equivocating correctness and goodness with something that it exists. It's a precondition for it to do anything. So that's part of what's good.
So is
So-
it that
Are you not a naturalist? I know that in the debate that you said that you were a what's it called? A methodological naturalist.
Yeah,
But are you like, do you hold to naturalism, or do you think that there's
I just
like
don't
something
care.
else, or what?
I just don't care.
I do want to clarify?
so you don't-
methodological
does that mean that you
naturalism
just
is
don't
not an
think about it?
ideology or a position.
I don't know if there's a supernatural or not. So I mean,
What'd you say, Leo?
I said, just to clarify, methodological naturalism is not a worldview or an ideology. It's not like an epistemic position that
yeah.
one can take. It's a methodology. It's literally just a fanciful philosophical term for science.
Oh, sure, I know.
So to be
I mean,
a
methodological-
methodological naturalist would be like saying that you are that you adhere to scientism in terms of the philosophical or the philosophical ideology where you can only ever come to know things through science. And I reject that. I would assume probably everybody in the room rejects that. But
Yeah,
that's
don't
what I
think-
hear when people tell me that they are a methodological naturalist. The better way to word it is I use methodological naturalism.
Yeah, that's fair.
Well, I mean, okay, but I think we're saying the same thing. Like, I don't think that methodological naturalism has anything to do with philosophy. It has to do with how we use science to come to conclusions.
Well, isn't that philosophy?
There's a philosophy of science, though.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that's deeper.
Because but methodological naturalism is a term that you would hear or see more frequently in the philosophy of science rather than actually in like applied or physical sciences.
Yeah.
Okay, but I mean, like, what I'm trying to get at is that I accept that somebody can be or can use methodological naturalism without holding to naturalism.
That's
Oh,
correct.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to explain to Matt Slick.
Yeah, I know.
He
But
did
you,
not
you got him
define-
irritated because you were not really answering some of his questions whenever he was asking you about what you thought. If you had just said that I don't care and I don't think about those things, that would have been honest.
Yeah, I mean, I could have said that. I thought it was
Matt
irrelevant because
Slick-
I don't
Matt
really.
Slick didn't really have a very good definition for methodological naturalism.
Yeah.
So I mean, it seemed to me that he was saying that it presupposes naturalism, so that naturalism is built into it. That's not what it does. It just states that science as a tool can only be used to discover and learn about the natural world, but it does not make the assumption that the natural world is all that there is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes the
I
statement
agree.
that that's all science can study, but that's not a statement that that's all there is. So yeah.
Yeah. But you accept that, right? Like, science
Yes.
cannot explore, by definition, the supernatural.
I
If
would
it
agree.
exists.
Yes.
Okay. So Snake is it sounded to me when you were talking about using the laws of logic to ground good, that you were suggesting good was function.
it's what it's good for.
So can I ask a cool question? Just because I want to understand that I'm understanding Snake's position correctly. Because being a moral relativist, when people, especially who are non-theists, who tell me that they're like, a moral realist or an objectivist, I'm really interested in learning it. So are you working off of? I'm just gonna say this as a statement. You tell me if it's right or if it's wrong, and we can go from there. That goodness corresponds to correctness in some way, which then has some corresponding truth value, which would mean that you would utilize logic as a way of arriving at the truth value, then establishing the correctness and deriving the goodness out of that.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Okay.
And I use the dictionary definition of having the qualities required for a particular role, and obviously that would be the objective definition, and so just something being desired or approved of would be subjective, so I don't hold to that.
Okay, so then how does function or good being associated with function or the ability to perform a function translate into coming up with some kind of morality? So like based off of that, what is your conclusion? What is your conclusion regarding the morality of abortion? And
well,
what is the thought process to that?
Yeah, there's a few layers between those two.
Okay.
So basically, what I would say is for existence, like what is the good way to exist? And that would be to have basically as many functions as you can. And the more the better, because there's just more existence. And so there's when there's contradictions, that basically reduces the things that can happen.
So then it follows that abortion is wrong?
It doesn't follow that abortion is wrong.
Doesn't it reduce function because the baby has potential function?
Well, in a vacuum, sure. But when you look at the larger picture, so if the principle would be freedom, just to sum it up in one word, if people don't have the freedom to control their own birth cycles, that's a much worse outcome. That you're losing way more potential.
What's the function of freedom?
The function of freedom is to have coexistent things. If that makes sense.
Why? I'm not really sure how you're coming to the conclusion that freedom is moral if morality is function.
Thank you.
Well,
that's exactly what I said.
It increases the amount of things that existing things are good for.
How does it increase? How does it do that? Can you give an example?
I like to use ice cream as an example. So if you only have one flavor of ice cream, the system can only have one option. But if you go to Baskin Robbins and get 32, 36 flavors, then the system has more freedom and you have more options. That it's good for more things.
Okay, I can have more freedom by having less traffic in the morning by genociding everyone in the cars in front of me, Snake. Is that a good thing? That maximizes freedom.
For you, but not for the rest of the world. That's the thing.
But
You
don't
get to just
it doesn't matter.
you-
It's still maximizing freedom. So what's the
No, it's
problem?
not.
It's my freedom, and maybe I judge my freedom as being the
But
most
you're
important.
not the whole system.
Why does their freedom matter?
You're not the whole
Actually,
system.
under Snake's view, and correct me if I'm wrong, Snake, I think that you would probably be decreasing freedom by doing that because there's less agents there that can have it.
Exactly.
Hey,
But
Brian.
I'm maximizing my own freedom, and I have no justification
But
yet
you're
from
not-
either of you of
Hey,
why I should
actually, I wanna
prioritize their
go back-
freedom over
But-
mine.
Smokey, you're
I
not
wanna
the whole
go-
system.
I want to go back to what Leo just said, because if having more entities or agents creates more function, then that still seems to follow that abortion is immoral, because you are removing function.
Killing.
That's a question for Snake, not me.
Yeah, killing.
Hey, Gotcha Kevin, Erica is here. Party's over.
Hey, Erica, party's over.
Snake, not me.
It's my favorite Kevin. Good to see you.
And she's
It's like when a lady walks into like a bar, like a
Oh, it's me.
I'm getting an echo.
Hey, Erica, do you want to say a couple things?
Sorry, I had to mute my background thing because yet again I left the stupid YouTube thing unmuted, and then when I got in here, it was like double. I was hearing double. I don't want to derail the conversation. You guys continue, and when there is a natural break, I would love to hop in because there were some big claims being thrown around about carbon 14 and diamonds earlier by Mr.
Yeah.
Slick. And I was dying to get in here and discuss that
Actually,
then,
I
but
would
my
like to hear
fiance and I
that.
were eating Thai
Yeah,
food.
actually,
If
this
I
would
may?
be a really good place to kind of derail
Yeah,
this
I'm
topic. Because I know
curious.
Smokey Saint was kind of really interested in hearing
Please,
what's
yeah.
I just don't like capitalism in general, at all.
Yeah.
How is it freedom when you're forced to go work for somebody else for the vast majority of your life, and that by the time you retire, you're at an age where you honestly don't really have the ability to enjoy the things that you wanted to do because you spent your whole life working for somebody else, making them vastly rich, while they threw you nothing but
Yeah.
pennies for every dollar that you earned for them.
Yeah, exactly.
But no,
And-
we're free. We're so free. So free.
Yeah, and Jeff
Wow.
Bezos is one of the most disgusting people alive. I quit Amazon, by the way. I had enough
Good.
of that bullshit.
Good.
I'm like, fuck Amazon. Fuck Jeff Bezos.
Well, I don't mean to start off a whole nother topic, but why do you think you're forced to work for someone else?
Because if I don't work for somebody, I will die. Or I will live in such a meager living that I might as well die. Like, be homeless.
So, but that assumes that they owe you stuff.
But who owes who stuff?
Someone owes you a house, food.
Well, I mean, I would argue that yes, if no human ever asked to be born, so all the things that they need to sustain their life, like literally being alive, food, water, shelter, healthcare, shouldn't have to be bought at all.
So that's on your parents.
Not necessarily.
All right. Well,
To a certain age, yes.
we should have this debate at a later time.
Yeah, I'm all for that.
Yeah, anyway, okay, I am seriously out of here. Good night, guys.
Yeah, I gotta get to go into because my battery's about to fucking die.
All right.
All right. And I
So-
had a completely different topic anyway. For Snake was right on the whole meta ethics thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how long do you want to go?
Alrighty, I'm out of here, guys. I'll talk to you
Alright.
later.
See ya.
Later. We don't have to go very long. I just
Okay.
wanted to say a few things to you about it because, like, I'm a moral realist or a moral objectivist like you are,
Okay.
and I also think that you're going in the right direction when you're talking about function. But the argument that you give to like get to the ought, I don't think it works really well, and I want to explain why real quick.
Okay.
And then after that, I would like to offer you an alternative model, and you can do whatever you want with it. You could throw it right into the trash, or you could decide that you like it, or you could say, well, it's okay, but I like my own theory better, whatever. So with your theory, though, you started off with existence, right? And how nothing is impossible and how it's logically impossible. But my point here is that logical impossibility, because from there you jump over to existence is good, that because nothing is impossible, there's something prescriptive about existence. And so like with that, it basically points to the necessity of there being something. And the logical impossibility of there being a nothing. But this is all factual state of affairs.
Mhm.
And so I don't think that implies an ought to anything. And so like there's a difference between pointing out like necessities and facts and things like that versus pointing out a prescriptive course of action. I would say that the prescriptive course of action would be a subset of facts, but not all facts are prescriptive. So, like, for example, you could say that, Abraham Lincoln wore a long sleeve blue button down shirt on May 1st, 1860. And, and that just suppose that that's true. That's true, but it has absolutely no relevance to ethics. Mm-hmm. So that thing right there, like, I think you're kind of jumping from describing a bunch of is about necessity to a prescriptive ought. And I don't think that jump and the way that you're forming that argument works. So that's my criticism of how you're doing that. And I have an alternative model, which I'll get into in a second. But do you have any thoughts you'd like to add at first about what I've said so far?
Yeah, I'm kind of trying to work out the relationship between, those concepts. But the way that I understand an ought is basically this is just like out of the English dictionary. An ought indicates obligation or correctness. So,
Yeah.
So I think I basically use it as the correct way to do something, and ought is just that's what it means.
Yeah, I like the obligation part of that. The correctness, though, is where you get into that vagueness, because you have to make those distinctions between, something that's simply factually correct versus factually morally correct, which I would argue is a subset of the facts.
Well, I would say that you're in that sense that you're obligated to do things correctly just by definition, because otherwise it's incorrect. So that's what the obligation means. Is whatever it is it has to be correct or it's incorrect.
Sure. But I mean, like in that sense, though, that's it's a more specific sense of correct, which is, a moral sense of correct, which the anti-realists would say doesn't exist. When you start talking about doing things correctly in the moral sense, they would say that doesn't belong in the set of facts. I agree with you that it does belong in the set of facts. And I think that looking toward function is going to give you the right answer. But the way I do it is this. First, I want to point to an is, like you did. You pointed to existence. What I'm going to point to, though, is the nature of the organism, whatever particular organism we're talking about. Mm-hmm. You can take humans, for example. And with respect to this, I want to point out that there are a set of facts about human nature. That's going to be my is. Now I want to get an ought. I want a prescription. I want something that points me in the direction of saying, do this kind of behavior. So my argument here is that upon the basis of the kind of being that we are, we're going to have a corresponding range of experiences upon the basis of our behavior. And if we act in such a way that it expresses and helps to flourish our nature, then we will have a corresponding sense of joy about our lives, a kind of satisfaction that we lived it. And if we act in a contrary way against our own natures, fighting it, acting in rebellion to it, not developing it, abandoning it and letting it stagnate, then we're going to have a corresponding sense of misery. And that sense of misery is inexorable because we can't escape the fact that we are human. And so this is a prescription. It's a prescription based on your own felt experiences about life, about what course of action to take. If you follow this route, you will achieve joy. If you follow the alternative route and live in rebellion to it, you will be miserable. And this gives you a prescription then to follow that course of behavior, which is dictated by the facts of your nature. That would be my account of deriving an ought from ises.
Yeah, I mean, I really try to avoid things like emotion, like happiness and stuff. Like, that's part of it. Happiness or misery will affect, the state of freedom. But it's like there are instances where I would say happiness is not really moral. Like, if you're just doing heroin all the time, yeah, you're going to be happy. But is that a moral good? No. So there's something, I would say happiness is buried deep within the framework. And I get what you're saying about the nature of things. Like, that's one of my arguments against slavery, like one of the ways to really sum it up quickly, because humans by their nature are not slaves. The only way to make a human into a slave is by creating a contradiction where you're saying that I'm allowed to violate your freedom, but you're not allowed to violate my freedom, and something like that. So it's a contradiction to our actual nature, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand.
And the other thing that I struggle with is like, well, if morality is just based on what's good for your species or whatever, okay, well then does that justify some parasitic or vampiric species to just enslave and kill all of us or drain us for their blood because that's what's good for their species? So I try to make the distinction larger than that. You know what I mean?
So, okay, there's a lot that's going on in some of the things that you said. The first thing that I wanted to say is that when you talk about happiness, there are different approaches that you can take toward defining that term. And the way that you seem to understand it is a kind of hedonism, like the heroin addict constantly juicing up.
Yeah.
But you can really question, I don't know how many heroin addicts you've met in your life. I've met, unfortunately, quite a few, and they're not happy individuals.
Oh yeah.
And so, I mean, like, there's a strong sense in which happiness does not equal hedonism. And like the hedonism would actually run contrary to the way that our nature actually works. It may be a much more sophisticated relationship to our environment than simply like, euphoric impulse.
Yeah.
There may be a lot that's required in terms of like, nurturing and development that has very little to do with that. But you'll still be able to look back upon your life and say, I'm happy that I lived that. If I were to have to do it again, I would be happy to do so. There's also, like, I wanted to point out, so you made the slavery point, which I'm not going to touch right now, but there was a following point that you made that I wanted to comment on, and it's kind of slipping my mind at the moment. Do you remember the last point that you made before I switched up with you?
I think it was about the nature of like a vampiric race. Would it be right for them to kill and enslave us all for our blood?
Yeah, so I mean, like with that though, you have to consider, because if your moral theory entails that the beings that it applies to, the vast majority of them don't actually naturally act in that manner, and your theory is based on their nature, then I think you're going to have a problem. And if you look at how species actually interact with each other, it is, in many senses, a parasitic relation. There are symbiotic relationships as well, but I mean, like, if you are considering like the perpetuation of the germline, from an evolutionary perspective, there's no reason why you wouldn't expect local competition between the germlines, or like germlines arising that are like higher order ones that depend on consuming lower order ones, using those like higher order, lower order terms rather loosely, but I think you get my point there. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, like, I don't think that, I mean, you may disagree. You may, think that we should be like perhaps vegan or vegetarian or something like that with respect to other species. My perspective, though, is that from a Darwinian view, and I tend to, so far in my studies, I'm turning out to be a bit more of a classical Darwinian than a lot of the people talking about the extended synthesis nowadays. And I kind of hold to that classical Darwinian view of competition. And if that's a natural thing, then I'm not quite so sure that you could argue that one species basically, trumping all the others and rising to the top of the food chain is somehow immoral and unnatural.
Well, yeah, in a sense, the competition is good because it allows improvement of the species, or, it allows the dominance of the, I don't know what to say, the more qualified species. But I think that the better option would basically be to preserve both. So the vampires and the humans could work out a deal where, okay, the humans are going to donate blood and the vampires are going to pay for it, and they can coexist. Well, that would be a moral solution.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting proposal. I mean, like, in terms of, like, even the question of whether or not you could have a mutually beneficial relationship with a parasite. Yeah. But like, putting that aside, the thing though is that my question would be, like, on whose standard would it be best to preserve both? Because if you would think about it again, if evolution, the way it works, can like localize a germline's concern to like its own progeny rather than some like, wider level of concern toward other species. But if evolution naturally does that in terms of like the production of this competition, then my, oh no, hold on. Sorry, let me try to collect it because it just kind of fell. Like, if this competition naturally arises, then from the human's perspective, that vampire species should be wiped out. And from the vampire species perspective, the humans should be subjugated. but why is one privileged over the other on your account? Like, or whose perspective are we relying on in order to make this judgment that the preservation of both would be the moral beneficial thing?
Well, it goes back to like just maximizing the amount of things that exist. So you could choose your preference based on who initiates the imbalance, like if both are coexisting and then one of them initiates the force to take over the other, like if then that would be then the one that's being victimized basically would be the one who you would have the preference for. But that's just from like our perspective. I don't think we shouldn't be looking at it like who is determining this or anything, because it should be objective. It shouldn't be based on any of our subjective preferences.
So when you say that we want to maximize the number of things that exist, so would you at least agree that we aren't interested in maximizing the number of evil things that exist, or perhaps like evil agents that exist running around?
Yeah, because it's kind of like self-contradictory. It would be like maximizing things that minimize the rest of everything else.
Yeah, and so I mean, like when you say that though, that turns out to be a pretty restrictive thesis, because it's not maximizing everything, it's only maximizing a certain type, which is to say the good type. And everything that is of the evil type is actually getting swept aside. So we're not maximizing the number of things that exist, really. What we're doing is maximizing a certain type rather than the overall, like, anything possible kind of range. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but it's kind of like in how you categorize it, if it's good or evil. It's like, so the good is just things existing. Well, then evil is the elimination of things that are coexisting. So
yeah, okay, so that is an interesting point that you're bringing up, because I mean, like, would it be a better world, a morally better world, if there was the production of, and this is kind of like a really crude example, but I think you're going to get my point when I say it, is that if there was more production of more just like literal feces on the sidewalk, would that be a morally better world? Even though, more, like in this case, more things now exist. Like all of these feces have suddenly popped onto the sidewalk. But does that mean that we're in a morally better world? Do you get where I'm going with that?
Yeah, and I would say, well, that interferes with the other things that could exist, because you could have a functional sidewalk which serves more functions than just a pile of feces.
Well, in that sense, though, like any particular thing coming into existence will interfere with another potential thing coming into existence, in the sense that it's just the one that was instantiated rather than the other. So, I mean,
yeah, and that is like how, like, you cannot create or destroy matter, so you always have to take something else and basically destroy it in its current form to create it into its creative destruction.
So on that account, though, I apologize. On that account, though, it seems that what you're left with is that everything is evil, because everything that has been instantiated is only instantiated by virtue of other potential things not being instantiated, and that's your very definition of evil. And so, like, upon the basis of all existence is this evilness that, that negates those other possibilities.
Well, the way I kind of think about it or visualize it is, it's a bunch of positive and negatives that are all adding up. So you're like killing in self-defense. The killing part is negative, but the preservation of your own freedom part is positive, so it comes out more positive than negative.
Okay. The last thing I'm going to throw your way on this is you've heard of these tricky little tests, like the trolley problem and all that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, if you have to make that decision where you have like one guy tied to the left-hand side of the track and 5 people tied to the right-hand side, and you're the only person who can make the decision as to who gets run over, How do you respond to such a situation from your moral framework?
Well, I guess it depends. If like the entire world is infected with some virus and there's one guy who can cure it tied to one side of the tracks, then I guess that might swing the decision. But under normal circumstances, I think you decide that with the ethic of so like you have the principles of freedom, and then you can derive ethics, which are like consistent ways for society, rules for society to act. And so if you violate those ethics, then I think like the trolley problem would have the ethic of like, well, don't initiate force where you don't have to. So I think changing the course of the trolley in some circumstances would be you initiating the force. But in other circumstances, it would be more like a self-defense act, because there might be someone tied to it so important that it would be catastrophic to allow them to die. And then there's the ethic of like, well, you defend you and your own. That makes sense. That can be universalized. Every person, you can make that ethic where you get to defend yourself and your family. So if your family is tied to the road, you'd be justified in switching it away from your family, but someone else would also be justified in switching it away from their family towards yours. So
I think I really like your answer to the question, because you're the first person that I've come across in conversation to emphasize that the lone person on the left-hand track could be extremely important. And most people don't pick up on that. And it's interesting because in your theory, even though it's like a maximization for the majority or the whole kind of approach, it still recognizes that you could end up sacrificing the many to the one under particular circumstances. And that's an interesting result to see in your theory.
And it's not about body count, and it's not strict utilitarianism either.
That's good.
Yeah.
And the last thing I had here was another kind of question in terms of the majority would be the test case involving the sheriff, the innocent man, and the rioting town. So you have a sheriff who knows that this man is innocent, but at the same time, he also knows that if he does not follow through in the prosecution, that his entire town is going to riot, and there's going to be tons of death at the scene, on the scene. And so, the question is, if we're concerned about the interests of the majority, he should prosecute the man, I suppose. But if he's only interested in the individual man and the legitimacy of his case, he would have to simply endure the riots and the loss of life that would result from it. So how would your framework approach that question?
Yeah, I mean, it is a tough problem. And I think you kind of have to step back, like outside of just the town problem. So if we have this standard where you can lie just to prevent riots, well, is that actually going to produce more or less violence in the actual long run? Because then, well, anytime a mob gets pissed off, well, they can just start killing people off, and then you start having like an authoritarian system. And so I think in some of those cases you have to stick to the truth and deal with the consequences as it comes. But I suppose it would really have to depend on the scale of things, because if it means saving the whole world, then you might have to sacrifice someone, and it doesn't make it good. It's just a little less evil than your other option.
I'm satisfied with that answer. I would go so far, I would say that it's unfortunate, but at the same time, I would describe it as a good action, if you have to make that decision, because the alternative is far worse in terms of cost.
Mm-hmm.
But Yeah, so I mean, like that's pretty much everything that I wanted to discuss with you. I appreciate the conversation, and yeah, I think that again, I agree with you about realism, and I agree with you about the importance of function. It's just that you and I differ about how to get there, and I do see that there are differences in our account. Yours is definitely an account that takes a broader view of like a more inclusive view of like other species. The scope of your moral concern is much broader than in my case. So I just note that, but still interesting theory. Thank you.
Yeah, and I really appreciate criticism. And yeah, I like your example. I think that's one of the toughest examples. The sheriff in the writing town. I think it's kind of like if there's a terrorist or something and you can take him out, but there's innocent people in the building, like, you know, it's kind of a conundrum like that.
Yep.
But
Yes,
I think that I'm trying to find a way to be able to actually quantify like these really tough problems, which is consistent with how we quantify some of the easier problems.
Well, I mean, I know that I know you're not taking like a classical utilitarian approach, but since you do seem to like have a priority for the majority in a wider sense, there are like certain works that I've heard of that try to like dive into utility metrics where they actually try to measure this stuff. So you might find helpful material there.
Yeah, it's closest to utilitarianism, I think, but it's not, because I think that underpinning all of this should be a heavy emphasis on individual rights, because that's where all of it comes from in the first place. That's what you'd be trying to defend by making these tough decisions. So
yeah, I that would get us into politics. I have a very critical view of the individual rights approach. I'm somebody who's very weird to talk to about politics because I don't really fall anywhere on the spectrum. I don't fit on the left. I don't fit on the right. I don't fit on authoritarian or libertarian, and I'm kind of in my own solar system.
Yeah, well, I lean libertarian for sure, but it's hard. I don't really fall. I don't agree with pretty much anyone on their politics. If you're on social media, have you checked out Being Classically Liberal or Unbiased America? No, I haven't.
Those are hot spots for libertarians these days. There's a ton on there. The Unbiased America, they're more of a conservative bent, but conservative libertarian. So yeah, but they do tend to gravitate a little bit toward that Trump populism. So not quite so purely libertarian.
Okay.
But yeah, they're good spots to check out, and they have good media articles. So.
All right, man. Well, yeah, we should have another talk sometime. But for now, I'm just gonna go to sleep.
Likewise, yeah, it's about that time. Yeah, good chat, and I'll catch up with you at another time.
All right, man. Peace out.
Yeah, peace.